Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, this is Sue Watkins. I'm the Climate Change Program Manager with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals at Northern Arizona University. Thank you for joining the webinar. This webinar series is highlighting tribes and tribal organizations that have been addressing climate change impacts. And it also provides information about technical resources and funding opportunities for tribes. We are offering the webinars with support from the U.S. Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station and in collaboration with the Forest Service and also with the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Project at the University of Oregon and the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative. Okay. This is the last webinar of the four-part webinar series that we've offered. Today's webinar is going to be focusing on climate change funding opportunities and technical resources for tribes. I will be talking about some of ITEP's resources and some of the opportunities and resources from the national level, and then Kathy Lynn from the University of Oregon will be speaking about regionally focused resources. This webinar is being recorded, and we plan to post the presentation and the webinar recording on ITEP's Climate Change Webinars webpage. And if you have any questions, please type them into the question box on the right side of your screen. And after the presentation, Kathy and I will answer your questions. Following the webinar, you'll receive a link to a short online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to provide feedback and suggestions of topics for future webinars. Here is my contact information and the contact information for Christina Gonzalez-Maddox, who works with me in ITEP's Climate Change Program. The Climate Change Program offers climate change trainings, webinars, a tribal climate change newsletter, the Tribes and Climate Change website, and much more. And we encourage you to visit our program website at the URL at the bottom of the slide. And also, please feel free to contact us if you have any questions about ITEP. Okay, so as I said, today's presentation is going to be by me and Kathy Lynn. I have been working at ITEP since 2006, and since 2009, I have led the development of ITEP's Climate Change Program. And Kathy Lynn is a faculty researcher in the University of Oregon's Environmental Studies Program. Kathy coordinates the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Project, which is a collaboration between the University of Oregon's Environmental Studies Program and the USDA Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. And that project focuses on building an understanding of how climate change is impacting the culture and sovereignty of indigenous communities in the United States. Okay, so as I said, I'm going to start by talking briefly about some of the resources that ITEP has to offer to tribes. The first one are trainings. We've been offering trainings on climate change adaptation planning since 2010. And in that time, we've offered over a dozen trainings in different regions of the country. The training is typically a 3-day long training that provides an introduction to planning for climate change impacts. It's taught by a team of instructors, including ITEP. We have usually 2 to 3 tribal instructors. We also include people from federal agencies or sometimes universities. We do have 2 trainings that we are currently planning. One of them is April 28th to 30th in Pocatello, Idaho. And the following one is June 16th to 18th in Bishop, California, We are offering these 2 trainings with support from the Bureau of Land Management and in collaboration with the Great Basin Landscape Conservation Cooperative. We are encouraging tribes from the Great Basin region to come to the training. If people from outside of the region are interested, you're welcome to submit your application, and if we have room, we will take people from outside the region. I don't have any other trainings planned beyond those 2 until ITEP has identified a funding source that will support the trainings. We also have been offering webinars, thus today, and we hope to be offering quite a few more webinars in the future. We have a website we developed, I believe in 2008, called the Tribes and Climate Change website. You may have visited that before. We have lots of information on it. One area I particularly want to point out to you is the section on tribal profiles or case studies. We have over 40 tribal profiles on the website. These profiles or case studies highlight tribes that have been working on climate change, whether it be through mitigation or through adaptation. A lot of the profiles were developed by ITEP, but there were also many that have been developed by Kathy Lynn and her students at University of Oregon. We also have a number of resources on the website, including what we call the Tribal Climate Change Adaptation Planning Toolkit. This toolkit is a collection of files that we have developed over the last 4 or 5 years to use in our trainings. It includes templates, a worksheet, a spreadsheet, a checklist, some background material. And we recently have been making it available on our website, so you can just download it. Some of the materials are a little bit out of date, and I am in the process of updating some of the files. We also have developed climate change fact sheets for tribes. These focus on climate change impacts and adaptation, and they are focused on different sectors. For instance, we have one on forestry and one on fisheries and so on. And those are also available for you to download from the Tribes and Climate Change website. I send out a monthly tribal climate change newsletter. Many of you probably already receive it. I send it out by email, and each newsletter has a section of kind of updates from our climate change program, where I include announcements about upcoming trainings and other things that ITEP is working on climate change. I also include a section of recent news stories about tribes and climate change, a section on technical resources that may be of use to tribes, things such as recent reports and assessments, websites, planning tools, and so on. I include upcoming events, including trainings, conferences, webinars, and also a section on funding opportunities. These are relevant funding opportunities that I have heard of. And later in this presentation, Kathy Lynn is going to speak more about funding opportunities and a funding database that she has created. ITEP also has a couple of resource lists, and these are spreadsheets that I've been providing during our trainings, and I don't have them available on our website as of yet, but I'm planning to add them to the Tribal Climate Change Adaptation Planning Toolkit. One of the spreadsheets lists a number of different guides and tools that can be used in adaptation planning. I also have a spreadsheet that lists tribal vulnerability assessments and climate change plans that are available online. And I am providing that to training participants because I believe it's really useful to look at other plans that have been developed by tribes. So those were ITEP's resources. We also have a lot more I won't go into. I wanted to mention some other trainings and webinars that are available. The National Conservation Training Center, which is run by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, has been offering a number of different climate change trainings. Some of the more recent ones have been called Climate Smart Conservation. And you can go to their website and do a search, like say on climate change, and see what trainings they have available. Some of their trainings are held at their training center in West Virginia, but they also have been offering trainings in different parts of the country. So it's worth taking a look at what they have available. There are other trainings that are offered by different entities, but usually it's maybe just a one-time offering, and they're not repeatedly offering trainings. There are some online trainings available. Again, the National Conservation Training Center, I saw, has an online training it's an introduction to communicating climate change, and it's a self-paced training, so you can go to the website and find information about that and enroll in it. I also included something called Coursera, which is sort of a place where you can find trainings. These are really huge online trainings, like people from all around the world sign up for these. They're free, and they're offered by different universities and different entities through Coursera. And I know in the past they've had some climate change trainings, and I believe they have one or two that are upcoming, so it can be worth checking that out. You can just Google Coursera and you can find their website. There are tons of webinars that are available, offered by lots of different people, and I try to include relevant webinars in the newsletter, and also on the Tribes and Climate Change website we have an events calendar, and so I add webinars there. I want to speak briefly about some adaptation planning frameworks. If you start reading about adaptation planning and looking at guidebooks and so on, a lot of them kind of present a sort of circular model such as this, where it's basically there are different phases of the adaptation planning and different processes. So, one of the first phases is just understanding what the problem is, and that's, identifying, or finding out how climate is changing in your region, and what are the impacts of the climate change going to be, and what are the vulnerabilities that you or your tribes or tribal resources have to those impacts. And then the next phase is the planning phase, where you start coming up with strategies that will help you address those impacts, and to assess the strategies and select which ones that you're to try to implement. And then the managing phase is where you're implementing the strategies and monitoring the effectiveness of that strategy. Is it working the way you had hoped? And evaluating your plan, and then you may end up just kind of going through the cycle, kind of reevaluating and changing your plan as you get more information about impacts and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to present this slide because it kind of shows the general kind of circular process. And now I'm going to talk about a few different specific frameworks that are available. One was made available recently online. It's called the U.S. Climate Resilience Toolkit. And this, again, kind of lays out different steps for adaptation planning. And here they show it as, identify the problem, determine the vulnerabilities, investigate options, evaluate risks and costs, and take action. And if you can click on each of those, and it brings you to another web page that provides more information and some available resources and case studies. If you look along the top of the screenshot, you can go to a page that just talks specifically or presents a lot of different tools, or you can look at different topics and just some of the expertise that's out there. Okay. Another website I just came across recently is the National Sea Grant Resilience Toolkit. And again, they present a lot of different resources that are available. These are, have more of a focus on kind of coastal situations. And since this webinar is focusing on the Northwest and Alaska, I thought this would be a good website to point out to you, and you can go to the website and kind of explore some of the different resources they have there. There are quite a few different guidebooks available, and I'm only going to list a few of them. The first one, Preparing for Climate Change, is one of the earlier guidebooks that came out, or at least that I became aware of, and it presents a kind of high-level, broad framework for planning for climate change impacts, where you look at different sectors that are being impacted. And the trainings that I've been offering have been loosely modeled around this framework, and it came out, I think, in 2007, but I think it's still quite useful as a framework to follow. Another guidebook that EPA came out with is Being Prepared for Climate Change, and this is also kind of taking a risk-based approach where you're identifying impacts, vulnerabilities, and risks. The next one is a guidebook put out by California, and it's a climate change handbook for regional water planning. And the reason I included this one is to point out that some of the guidebooks are kind of broad, you look at a lot of different sectors, but some are more focused, like such as this one is focused on planning for climate change impacts on your water resources. Another guidebook put out by the National Wildlife Federation, and they've put out a couple of guidebooks. This one is called Climate Smart Conservation, and again, it presents a process for planning, and in this case, it has more of a focus on kind of species and habitat and ecosystems. And another guide source, especially good for Alaskans, is by the Alaska Sea Grant, and it's called Adapting to Climate Change in Coastal Alaska. And if you go to that website, they have a number of resources there. They have kind of a framework for planning, but they also have some climate change fact sheets and some other resources. And as I said, there are a whole lot more different guidebooks out there. There are also lots of other resources. One some of you may be familiar with is CAKE, which is a web page that EcoAdapt, an organization in the Northwest, hosts. And if you haven't been to the CAKE website, they have a really huge amount of information there. They have lots of case studies of adaptation from all around the country. They have resources, database, lots of tools, and so on. The Georgetown Climate Center Adaptation Clearinghouse is another source where you can find information on adaptation and adaptation frameworks and who's doing what. There is a website that EPA has that lists different programs that EPA has that focus on climate change adaptation, but they also include links to other federal agencies' climate change adaptation programs. So if you're trying to find information about a specific federal agency, this might be a place to go to. I also included in other resources an upcoming event, the National Adaptation Forum, which is scheduled for May 12th to 14th in St. Louis, Missouri. This is the second National Adaptation Forum. The first one was 2 years ago. And I went to the first one. I thought it was really useful. There were a lot of people there. At that one, there were about 500 people, and multiple concurrent breakout sessions focusing on climate change and adaptation, the huge poster session, and it brings together people from all across the country, from different entities, federal agencies, state agencies, nonprofits, universities, colleges, and also tribes. And this next adaptation forum in May is going to be bigger, probably maybe 750 to maybe even 1,000 people, I don't know. And I worked with a group of people from across the country to propose some tribally focused sessions, which were accepted, so that's exciting. There will be some tribally focused sessions, and also lots of other sessions. So if you're interested in learning more about climate change, adaptation and adaptation planning and implementation, I strongly encourage you to go to this conference. They are currently accepting registrations. Early bird registration ends on February 28th, so that's just a few days. And then after that, you can still register, but the registration fee is a little bit higher. You can also apply for travel scholarships, and the deadline for applying for scholarships is also February 28th. So if you're wanting to go to the forum and you don't have travel funds, you can apply for them. And me and several other people are working on identifying funds for tribes, for these travel scholarships. So you can go to the National Adaptation Forum website and find out more information, and you can register and apply for the scholarships there. And with that, we are going to switch over to Kathy, and she is going to be talking about some more regionally focused opportunities.
Good morning, Sue. Can you hear me all right?
I certainly can. Sounds good.
Excellent. And can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, and hopefully right now it's just up on the PowerPoint, is that right?
It's on the PowerPoint.
Excellent.
Yep.
Well, thank you all for inviting me to join you in this presentation, and it's great to talk with everyone today. I am going to focus on talking about some of the Pacific Northwest regional resources around climate science, current research projects, and then specifically funding opportunities at the end of the presentation. I want to start by saying that there are so many resources available in the Pacific Northwest. There's so much climate science being developed, so many research projects underway, that I am sure that I have missed something. And every day it seems like there are new research projects underway and opportunities. And one of our goals through the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Project is really to connect tribes with the resources that are available in the region. So I will do my best to give a sense of what is out there, and if there are questions at the end, if I've missed anything, please do feel free to chime in. So I'm going to start by talking about the climate science centers and the landscape conservation cooperatives. Those were established under a secretarial order in 2009, which established the climate science centers and landscape conservation cooperatives, which are non-regulatory partnerships and aim to provide scientific information, tools, and support for decisions around large landscape areas. So the image that you're looking at right now is a picture of all of the climate science centers in the kind of the gray outlines are the climate science centers, and then the colored areas are the landscape conservation cooperatives. So I believe there are about 9 climate science centers and I think 26 landscape conservation cooperatives in the country, maybe 21 it says here. And these have been established again since 2009 and are resulting in really phenomenal partnerships between federal agencies and tribes and states and other groups that have come together to really prioritize the kind of climate science that needs to be developed to help in making decisions around climate change and landscape conservation in the future. So in this region, there are 2 climate science centers that are really working towards engaging tribes. The Northwest Climate Science Center, which includes, again, I'll switch back here, primarily Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. It encompasses a little bit of Northern California. Is providing climate science and decision support tools to address conservation and management issues in the Pacific Northwest. The Northwest Climate Science Center has developed a tribal engagement strategy. This includes, at their executive level, there are 3 tribal organizations that are a part of the Executive Stakeholder Advisory Committee, including the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. They have partnered with the Alaska Climate Science Center as well as the North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative to leverage some of their funds on tribal projects, and I'll talk about some of those in a minute. The Alaska Climate Science Center seeks to improve the understanding of responses in Alaska to climate change. They have worked with, again, the other Climate Science Center and the Landscape Conservation Cooperatives to support some specific projects, one of which is in the Chugach region of Alaska, and has aimed at representing 7 tribes in the region to fund projects to understand climate impacts on subsistence foods. One of those projects was actually featured in one of the other webinars through this series. There are 3 landscape conservation cooperatives in the region also that are really working to engage tribes. The North Pacific Landscape Conservation Cooperative promotes development, coordination, and dissemination of science to inform landscape-level conservation and sustainable resource management. They have formed a traditional ecological knowledge and science subcommittee, and through that have actually funded a broad range of tribally led projects that are aimed at really understanding the role of traditional ecological knowledge in climate science initiatives. And there is a link on their website that lists out all of the traditional ecological knowledge projects that they have funded. And again, they've partnered with the 2 climate science centers to leverage funding for some of those projects. The Great Northern Landscape Conservation Cooperative has a vision of sustaining natural systems to support healthy and connected populations of fish, wildlife, and plants, sustains traditional land uses and cultural history. They have a couple of different initiatives that have engaged tribes. One very recent initiative is the Columbia Basin Partner Forum, and again, there are links on their website that will take you to learn more about that. But it is, they're developing a kind of a strategic science strategy right now and are really interested in engaging with tribes on that effort. Another is their support for the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribes Climate Change Strategic Planning. The third landscape conservation cooperative in the region is the Great Basin Landscape Conservation Cooperative. And like the other LCCs, they're bringing together researchers, tribes, universities, agencies, and NGOs, non-governmental organizations, to address and protect the natural and cultural resources in the region. And they have partnered with the Institute for Tribal Environmental Professionals to host a number of climate change adaptation trainings, one that has already occurred and one that's upcoming. So another resource in the region that also has a national role is the USDA Climate Hub, which were developed very recently to develop and deliver science-based regional information and technologies. And in the Northwest, they have a focus specifically on forest lands, grazing lands, and on tribal communities. So the image on your screen shows the coverage of the Northwest USDA Climate Hub. And you know, there's a lot of connections between what the climate hubs and the climate science centers and landscape conservation cooperatives are doing, and again, a lot of resources that are informational resources that are available. One of the things that I wanted to highlight in terms of information on climate science are the national and regional climate assessments that have been developed in recent years. Last year, the National Climate Assessment was published and includes not only a chapter specifically on the Northwest, but a dedicated tribal chapter. And the Northwest chapter includes a lot of information on what tribes in the region are doing to identify impacts of climate change and around strategies for adaptation and mitigation. And a number of tribes in the region actually helped contribute to that chapter, and specifically to the Northwest Climate Assessment, which is another link that's included on this slide. Another national level assessment is the National Fish, Wildlife, and Plants Climate Adaptation Strategy. And again, these are all assessments that include some specific information to tribes in the region. So beyond these assessments, there are a number of organizations and consortiums that are producing climate science and research that is of potential interest to tribes. The first is the Climate Impacts Research Consortium, which is funded by the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration to provide policymakers, resource managers, and others with the best available science covering climate change in the region. Their regional scope includes Montana, Washington, Oregon, and Idaho. The second is the Oregon Climate Change Research Institute, OCRI. Again, I showed the Northwest Climate Assessment. They were a convening author of that Northwest Climate Assessment and are focused on providing climate change information in really accessible formats and working with those in Oregon and also in the region information on climate data that's available. Similarly, in Washington State, the Climate Impacts Group at the University of Washington is studying the impacts of natural climate variability and global climate change. Another resource is the Northwest Fire Science Consortium, which is working to accelerate the understanding of wildland fire science, and a lot of that is certainly linked to climate projections. And the last example here is the USDA Forest Service Pacific Northwest Research Station. They have a number of recent studies around climate change, including one on adaptation to climate change on the Olympic National Forest, another looking at climate change, carbon, and forestry in the Northwest. And the reason that I put all of these links out there is because a lot of tribes are trying to connect to where there is current climate data and science in accessible formats that tribes can use to inform their own understanding of climate impacts and use in whatever way is appropriate for tribes as they're both, potentially using traditional knowledges as well as trying to connect with the scientists that are producing data. And through the Tribal Climate Change Project, we have a network, and every month we have conference calls, and right now we actually have a focus on trying to bring on some of these scientists and some of these organizations to talk about how tribes can use the existing data to inform their own understanding of climate impacts, whether or not it's appropriate to look at things like downscaling data, trying to take information that might be at a rather coarse level and think about how you can apply that at a finer scale for specific tribes. So those are some of the goals that we have on the network, are actually bringing these scientists onto our network and talking about what the applicability of some of the climate data that's out there is. So some of the specific research that's taking place, some of which that tribes are actually engaging in, are listed on this screen. The Washington Ocean Acidification Center was established in 2013 as part of, it was kind of a result of the Blue Ribbon Panel on Ocean Acidification, and provides some information that tribes may be really interested in that are concerned about the impacts of ocean acidification on cultural resources. The Norwest Stream Temperature Regional Database is hosting stream temperature data, and it has been compiled from hundreds of biologists and hydrologists working for agencies in the region to use with statistical models in order to develop an accurate and consistent set of climate scenarios for streams in the region. Dan Isaac is the lead researcher for this project and has come onto the network to talk about his efforts, and is really eager to partner with tribes and other communities in the Northwest to develop, to build this database and develop the most relevant information possible. Another resource is a Scenarios Network for Alaska and Arctic Planning, which is aimed at understanding the climate's current and future directions to advise policy and management. And really this site emphasizes a practical application of developing scenarios to understand climate change. And one of the kind of related products has been a partnership between this SNAP program and the Alaska Climate Science Center to develop temperature and precipitation projections. So these are just some of the examples of how maybe the broader level climate data is being used to inform and further research that's getting to more of a finer scale, or to develop specific models and projections that might be really useful for tribes in this region. So moving on from some of the science, I wanted to highlight some of the other resources and organizations in the Northwest that might be of interest to tribes participating in this webinar. And the first is just a link to the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Network. As I mentioned, we have monthly phone calls, and one of our goals is to continually bring on the scientists and the agencies that are developing resources and tools and data that might be of use to tribes to really find out where those connections are. Some of the regional tribal groups working on climate issues in this area are, I mentioned, the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission. They have a lot of really phenomenal science and information available on their website. The Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians, I wanted to mention, is having a Tribal Leaders Summit on climate change on March 10th and 11th in Portland, Oregon. There's a direct link to the registration page if that's something you're interested in. The contact for that is Don Sampson, and he's listed on that website. Other organizations in the region working on climate issues are the Northwest Indian Fisheries Commission. The Intertribal Timber Council has a kind of a focused research subcommittee. So there are a lot of groups doing some really great work. Some other regional partners that are working on climate change that I've listed here are the Point No Point Treaty Council and the Puget Sound Partnership for tribes in the Puget Sound region in Washington State. They have some really useful information and projects underway. EcoAdapt, the GEOS Institute, which is based in Oregon, Cascadia Consulting, and Adaptation International. These are other groups that are working on climate change, developing climate resources, consulting with tribes. Again, I'm sure that there are other organizations that I have missed here, but I wanted to provide kind of a picture, a snapshot of the range of groups that are working on these issues in the region. So I'm going to move on now to the last part of my presentation, which is focused on funding resources. We have worked to develop a website, an interface that I'll actually give you a demonstration of at the very end, to provide as much information as possible on existing grants that tribes are eligible for and that might be in some way related to climate change to support climate efforts. It may be as specific as funding to develop climate adaptation plans, but it also might be broader, thinking about public health or thinking about energy. So we work really closely with ITEP. They send out their monthly newsletter and have on their website a lot of great information about funding and opportunities. And so we just, whenever we see funding opportunities, we put them into our database, which looks like this. This is a screenshot. And again, I will give you a tour of how to use this in just a minute. But as you can see, when you go to the website, it will provide you a listing of grants sorted by deadline. So whatever the next kind of deadlines are for the grants, those are the ones that you'll see first. Right now, I wanted to highlight a couple of current funding opportunities. The Great Northern Landscape Conservation Cooperative Strategic Science Support Program has a grant, a request for proposals that's out, and the deadline is March 13th. Another USDA grant that has a deadline relatively soon is the Community Foods Project Competitive Grants Program. So I put these two up here just so you can see some current funding opportunities that we have listed on our website. But I'm really excited because yesterday the Department of Interior's Bureau of Indian Affairs announced their Tribal Cooperative Landscape Conservation Conservation Program. This is adaptation funding to help strengthen resilience for tribes, for tribal communities. And they are going to award $8 million, $4 million for climate adaptation planning, and $4 million for ocean and coastal management planning. These grants, the proposals are due by April 24th. And there is, I don't believe this notice has been posted to the internet yet. Both Sue and I have sent the request for a proposal, the notice of funding out to our networks, but if it's not something that you've received yet, then you can email either Sue or I. There's also an email listed in this PowerPoint presentation for the primary contact for this funding opportunity. But this is, I believe, the third or fourth year that the BIA has issued notices of funding. I know they did for 2013 and 2014 notices of funding to support tribal climate change adaptation planning. So it's a really exciting opportunity for tribes to go after this dedicated funding for tribal climate change adaptation. So this is the question slide, and you, if you go online, you'll be able to download this and get all of our contact information, but I'm going to dart out of the PowerPoint so that you can all see the database, the funding guide that we've been using to try to just organize information on current grants. And this was something we actually originally developed with the Environmental Protection Agency in Region 10 as a way to just ensure tribes had the most accessible funding information about tribal climate change related grants. So as you see, you can sort by grant. You can look at the titles. You can sort by deadline. What you can do here is if you were really interested in finding grants about let's say fisheries, you can go to fisheries. You could look for a particular geography, a particular region of the country that you're interested in, and you click submit, and it will give you grants or programs related to fisheries. I'm going to go back here, and the other thing that we've done is we've started to actually put information on adaptation plans that have been developed. Sue mentioned the profiles and the different plans that have been developed. So now you can go and look for a wide range of tribal climate change adaptation plans that have been developed around the country. This isn't just for the Northwest. You can also look at the profiles that Sue mentioned. And again, most importantly, we really wanted to focus on the grant information. So I will leave it there so that we have time for questions. Sue, is there anything else that you wanted to add?
Kathy, this is Christina Gonzalez-Maddox. I think, unfortunately, Sue's internet connection dropped out, and I'm sure we can all sympathize with having that happen at an inopportune time. But she's going to be trying to join us by phone. So, Sue, are you on the line? Okay. So it sounds like we may have lost Sue, but we do have some questions. And as Kathy mentioned, we'd strongly encourage, if you have any questions at the moment, to type them into the question box, which is on your control panel for GoToWebinar. We do have one right off the bat. Sue, is that you?
Yes, I called in on my cell phone. I lost all connection with the internet.
Oh, I'm glad we've got you back, though. Wonderful. So, Sue, I'll go ahead and read the questions, and then if you and Kathy would kindly respond, that would be great.
Thank you.
All right. So we have a question here concerning other trainings and webinars. One gentleman who's in the audience took a Coursera course a year ago and regretfully reported that it wasn't very good, didn't sounds like meet his needs. It was international in scope and well-grounded. I'm sorry, it was very good. It was international in scope and well-grounded in science underpinnings. So I think just reinforcing, Sue, what you mentioned earlier about those Coursera courses that are available to folks. So that was more of a comment. Here we have a question.
Yeah, before we move on, I did quickly look up on Coursera. They have an upcoming training starting April 1st. It's called Water in the Western United States, and it's being offered by University of Colorado through Coursera. And another training starting April 20th called Turn Down the Heat, and that's about climate change, and that's being offered by the World Bank.
Thank you, Sue. That's a big help. Kathy, I don't know if you have anything to add specifically about Coursera, but Sue, I'm thinking maybe we can send out an email to attendees just with that information you provided just now. We do have another question. This question is in the ATNI meeting. Oh, excuse me. Is the ATNI meeting only for tribal leaders, or would it also be a good meeting for technical staff to attend?
I'll go ahead and take that. That's a great question. Is the Affiliated Tribes of Northwest Indians meeting that I mentioned that's taking place in March only for tribal leaders, or would it be good for technical staff to attend? I'm not 100% sure of the answer to that question, but I will absolutely contact Don Sampson for clarification. Having seen an early agenda, I think there's a lot of information that would be really good for technical staff. I know that they're really eager to engage tribal leadership on this issue. And that was, I think, one of their goals in framing the meeting around tribal leadership. So I will talk with Don. I think, it might be possible that, well, I'm not sure. So I will talk with Don Sampson and get information back to the group about kind of what the response is. So I will do that.
Kathy, thank you for doing that. I will mention really quickly, it looks like Eliza is actually a steering committee member of the ATNI, and she's on the line at the moment, just typed into the question box that she is on the steering committee, and technical staff are welcome to attend.
Perfect. Thank you, Eliza.
Are there any other questions from the audience? We have a few minutes left, and we can take a couple more questions. I don't see any at the moment, but I'll give it another minute. And in the interim, just mention Sue offered, as well as Kathy, if you have any questions following the webinar, please do feel free to contact folks, either ITEP or the Pacific Northwest Tribal Climate Change Program directly. Either reach out to Sue or myself or Kathy Lynn, and we'll make sure to get back to you. It looks like we don't have any more questions at the moment. So I will let Sue, I'll let you go ahead and close it up.
Sure. I just want to thank everyone for joining the webinar. I'm sorry I lost my connection, but thankfully the rest of you were fine. This is the last webinar of this series. So we don't have any additional ones planned at this point. However, I do anticipate, we will be starting to plan some more webinars in the future, and I will be announcing any webinars on our Tribal Climate Change website and also in the newsletter. And Kathy's really good about sending out information to her list in the Northwest. With that, thank you. Have a good rest of the day, and we are ending the webinar. Thank you. Bye-bye.